everybody, my name is Sarah Obed Sheikh and I'm a level 4 computer engineering student. I'm here to present a seminar on the topic disaster recovery and business continuity planning in IT. Firstly, I'll explain to you the agenda, that is what exactly I'm going to present, and I'll be highlighting the key concepts that is related to the topic, which are basically disaster recovery plan, business continuity planning, and the relationship between a disaster recovery plan and a business continuity plan. Okay. Then further, I'm going to explain how the businesses actually lose data. We're also going to see the process flow, that is the DRP process flow diagram, and we are going to see the steps in creating a disaster plan for a company, and then we are finally going to conclude our presentation. The first key concept that I'm going to discuss is disaster. That is, what is a disaster? We all know what a disaster is, but just to explain once in a very clear and easy way, I will say that a disaster is basically an unexpected event that causes immense loss to the property and damage to human lives. Okay? And it's not always necessary that all of these things have to happen, but it is always necessary that a disaster causes loss, okay, and damages whatever is really necessary. Okay, so if I had to define disaster, it would go like it's a natural or man-made event that disrupts the operation of a business in such a significant way that a considerable and coordinated effort is required to achieve a recovery. So this is really true, because once a disaster strikes, it's really hard to get back to what it was, especially if a business has been undergoing a disaster, and it takes a long time for the business to get back to the business as usual stage. That is, the first stage is it's a very hard task for the businesses to get back to where they had started from. Now, the disasters can be broadly classified into natural and man-made types, and we're going to see what they are. Natural disasters can further be classified into geological, meteorological, other categories, and the health disasters. Now, the word the geological, that is the first part, the prefix geo, it means earth. So when we say geological, it means the disasters, the natural disasters related to the earth, and we see the various examples like earthquake and tsunamis, volcanoes, landslides, etc. Then we have the second category, that is meteorological, related to the weather. So when we say meteorological, we have like storms and hurricanes and the cyclones, etc. We also see other category, that is we have meteors and meteorites, floods, avalanches, etc., etc. That is meteors, if you know, these are heavenly bodies in the space, and there have been reports that these meteors from the space, they come and hit the Earth's surface, and since we never know when it's going to happen and where exactly they're going to hit, it is actually a disaster when they strike. And the fourth category is health, that is you have widespread illnesses, etc., like you have the H1N1 flu, the Zika virus, you can say the swine flu, and there are several other such epidemics which are spreading, and because of which it's causing immense loss to the humans. And it's natural, definitely it's natural, because we don't know from where, it's not in our control, and so it's not in our control, so we really need to take care of how to take care of this. Then we're going to see about the man-made disasters, which can be classified into four again, that is labor, socio-political, material, and utilities. Under labor, we see the disasters for a company, basically. If we consider a company, we see the labor, that is the employees of a company, may at times go on a strike, basically. And they might even engage in walkouts, that is, it's a basic kind of revolt to show that the company is not doing really well and the employees are not happy with their employers. Okay. Then we have socio-political disasters, that is we have war, terrorism, protests, and this is why is it considered a disaster, is mainly because it disrupts the normal functioning and it causes immense damage, because when people protest, then it causes damage in many ways, you know. It disrupts the normal day-to-day lives of the people who are affected by it. So that's why it's classified as a disaster. And materials, that is fires and hazardous material spills, for example, oil spills, oil slick, it's very common nowadays, and it causes immense damage to the property. Utilities, the utilities disasters is basically power failures, communication, water supply, fuel shortages, and radioactive fallout from power plant accidents. So if I had to explain these, it's basically these kind of disasters, that is man-made disasters, are disasters which are caused by man. Okay? Natural disasters are disasters which are caused by nature or the supreme power, which is not in our control. But man-made disaster, to a very, very large extent, it is under our control, because we humans are the cause of these kind of disasters. So we're going to next explore is, this is natural disasters in the past years and the impact on the continents. This is a diagram that clearly explains that any disaster, especially the natural disasters, because they cannot be controlled or they are not in our control, they cause immense damage to the economy of the world. That is, the world economy is at a loss whenever a natural disaster strikes. So we see that this is the statistics for the past 20 years, and we see that storms and floods have created immense damage, and they have put a lot of property, that is a lot of money to loss. That is USA, that is the America is the continent that has been affected widely, and around 870 billion US dollars has been just it has been lost. It's been damaged, just because of recovering from these natural disasters, since the life of the common man is disrupted, and due to this there's a lot of work and a lot of recovery process which needs to be undertaken before lives of the people can get back to normal. So this is a quotation which I just put it here, that is, projects that plan for failure will succeed. Definitely it's true, because if you're doing a project and you're not planning that in case of failure what's going to happen, then definitely it's not, it's really hard for the project to succeed, because in those cases there might be something coming up that we don't know what to do. Because if a company has taken a project, for example, and they haven't planned what is their procedure in case if there's a failure, in that case the project is going to fail. So are disasters something to worry about? Now this is a very very common question, and people are people in nowadays, they take disasters very normal, they aren't taking it really important. Okay, for example, companies, there are many companies in the world, they do not have a disaster recovery plan, because they do not they do not realize the importance of the harmful effects of the disaster. That is, they do not realize the importance of a recovery plan that is required for a company to mitigate a disaster. So we're going to see what are the worries we have, because any disaster, whether natural or man-made, whether it's affecting a country as a whole, or it's only affecting a company, or it's only affecting a project, it has certain damages, it has certain unfortunate happenings which we all need to worry about, and these are listed here. That is, it causes direct damage to the facilities and equipments. So this is really clear. For example, if there's a fire in a company, so we will definitely see that the rooms are burnt and the infrastructure has been affected to a great extent. It might even take up lives of people. So it's really very something to really worry about. And transportation infrastructure damage, yes, in the case of, you can say, in case of floods, in case of tsunamis, the transportation lines are affected. Okay, people are not able to get the food from other places, other cities from where they're actually taking. For example, in Oman we had the Gonu a few years back, and while that happened, a lot of roads were not in proper condition, and the country faced a major disaster. Communication outages, We know that when a disaster strikes, for example an earthquake, many cases are there where people are not able to communicate, because the communication channels have been disrupted. Finally, we have the utilities outages, which means that in a house, the utilities, for example, for a person to live, we need the basic utilities, that is electricity and water supply, etc. And when a disaster strikes, these utilities, they are not with us because their supply is disrupted to a very large extent. The second key concept that we are going to discuss is disaster recovery, like what we actually mean by it. In simple terms, the word itself gives the meaning, that is disaster recovery. That is recovering from a disaster in simple language, that's what it means. But if I were to define it, it would be like this. Disaster recovery is a set of policies or procedures to enable the recovery or continuation of services. So we know when a disaster strikes, the services are disrupted, and disaster recovery is a set of policies or procedures which guarantees the returning back of those services. Okay, that's it. We will go ahead. So this is another quotation by Philip Halford. It says, "Cars have brakes so they can go faster." This is very true. So what exactly it means for an IT industry, IT company, if we do not have a disaster recovery plan, that is, if we do not plan that our project is going to fail, we will definitely fail. Okay, because it's very important. For example, if you take this scenario, cars have brakes so they can go faster. It means that if the car doesn't have a brake, it means it's going to go and hit someone and it's going to end up in a disaster, right? So we need cars to have brakes for them to move faster. Yeah, it means the project is prepared for disaster situations. The projects can move ahead swiftly and with more confidence. The next key concept, the third one which we are going to explore, is disaster recovery plan, DRP. Basically, it is a plan. It's a business plan which outlines or it explains how the disaster recovery has to take place in the event of a disaster. So, if definition-wise, it says it's a business plan that describes how work can be resumed quickly and effectively after a disaster. For example, if you take a company which has had a fire, basically a fire has exploded in the company. So a disaster recovery plan would state and outline everything, that in case of a fire, what needs to be done, how it needs to be mitigated, and how the daily life of the employees of the company will get back to the normal from where it began. That is business as usual. The term is quoted as business as usual, which we'll see in the coming slides. And disaster recovery planning, it's just a part of business continuity planning and applied to aspects of an organization that rely on an IT infrastructure to function. So this is a plan and this is planning. So in other words, if I were to say, we would say that disaster recovery planning is a process to create a disaster recovery plan. Okay? So these are some points to know. That is, sooner or later everyone will understand the need to have a recovery plan. Some before the disaster and others after the disaster. So this is really true because we have some companies who really have a disaster recovery plan in place, whereas there are others who haven't even thought of it, So, but at some point of time they will realize it, because disasters are something which never tell and happen. So it's always better to be prepared for the worst. Okay, any risk can trigger a disaster. That's true. We have technology risk. We have human risks, like you have cyber attacks and terrorism, etc. We have natural risks, which we just discussed, like earthquakes. These are risks. Okay, so it's easy to plan for a disaster recovery than to find an excuse why the project doesn't have one when needed. Yeah, it's always better to plan in advance, so that when the actual problem occurs, we are well prepared to handle it. Okay, a disaster recovery plan creates confidence in the stakeholders and minimizes the risk the project holds. Yeah, that's very true. and the customers can be assured higher levels of service with certainty. Definitely customers will be interested to invest and would rely on a company which is having a clear disaster recovery plan, because then they are sure that their money is not going to be wasted, So that's the point. If you look at this diagram, it's very clear and it explains business as usual in the beginning. We start from here, and when a disaster occurs here, business disruption or disaster, we have an emergency response and we have a business continuity plan which brings back the business back to as usual state. Okay, this clearly explains the business continuity planning process, which is the next key concept that we are going to discuss. Okay, so we are going to discuss about business continuity planning, which is very simple to understand because the word itself implies the meaning in it. Business continuity planning, in my terms, would be planning for the continuity of the business in the wake of a disaster. Okay, so it means it's just not only in disaster also, but since we are discussing disaster recovery, we can say business continuity plan is more of it's a very broad term and we have a lot of things under it. A disaster recovery plan is a part of business continuity plan. Okay, so BCP is the process of creating systems of prevention and recovery to deal with potential threats to a company. This need not be only in the case of a disaster, because companies may have other kind of threats, like legal threats and other kind of threats. So it's about preparing the company for it, and the business continuity plan is an essential part of any organization because it's important. Why is it important? It's essential because it is the one which guarantees that the company will be back to the business as usual stage in the event of a mishap. Difference between DRP and BCP. Now, some people, they are confused between these two terms, which are actually different. Like this business continuity plan is a very broad area and disaster recovery plan is a part of it. Okay, next, because if we have a disaster and we do the recovery of it, in fact we are contributing to the continuity of the business. So that's how we link the two terms together. In other words, we would say that business continuity plan is a broad and disaster recovery is a small portion of it. Failing to plan is planning to fail, which is very well understood by us. Next. So the next key concept is not a concept, it's just a relationship between DRP and BCP, which I was just speaking about, and that says that yes, exactly. Business continuity plan is the blue portion and DRP is the pink portion, which explains clearly that DRP is a small portion of BCP and BCP is a very large portion of it. It's a very wide concept. So DRP is a subset of BCP. Just go to the previous slide. This symbol, it means subset. Okay. Now, how do businesses lose data? This is another concept which we had to discuss. Generally, it's because of the risks. Okay, if these risks are not mitigated properly, then we have the businesses losing their data. For example, we have technology risks, we have human risks and natural risks. Technology risks are like network outage and power outage and server infrastructure breakdown. So we never know when the power supply fails, okay, and the entire servers are shut down for a while, and this causes a lot of loss to the businesses because the people, that is, they have their information stored in the companies, they have the information stored in the servers, and if the services are down, then it causes a great risk and businesses might lose data. So we need to prepare for all this well in advance. Also human risks, that is, as I already mentioned, that cyber attacks, terrorist attacks and criminal attacks, these are something which are human, that is, it is based on human, that is, humans are the cause of it. So we can, to a large extent, reduce this, but we can never know when it's going to happen. It's really totally unexpected. And natural risks is flood, fire, hurricanes. It's always a risk in our lives because we never know when nature is going to do what. Now, this is the DRP process flow, okay, which is a 9-step process. And in DRP process flow, the first step is to identify the critical assets. Now, in a company, it's very important that we identify identify what are our critical assets. Before we devise a DRP, we need to know what is the critical asset that we have. For example, according to me, in a company, the most critical asset is the employees, the resource people, that is the personnel, the key personnel. They are the people who are really important, because the life of a human is far more important than anything else. So we have identified critical assets. So before we start preparing for a DRP, that is disaster recovery plan, we need to first identify which are the critical assets in our company. Okay? Then when we identify those critical assets, we see what are the things that are going to pose as a risk or a threat to these assets. Okay? Identifying the threats and risks. That brings us to the second process, that is the second procedure. Then the next thing is creating prevention strategy. Once we know our critical assets and we know our threats, first we need to devise what can be done to prevent any sort of a disaster. Okay? Because prevention is always better than cure. So in that case, if we see, we need to see what can be the prevention strategy which we could create. So in this step, the people of the key personnel, the higher managers, the authorities of the company, they sit together and they discuss, that is, they create the prevention strategy. Finally, they define the prevention actions. Once creating the strategy, then they define the exact actions that can be taken, you know. And then we have the creating the response actions, that is, in case of a disaster, what are we expected to do? Okay, creating those actions is what we discuss. And planning the recovery stages, that is, we need to see, that is, how the company is going to recover and what stages it's going to undergo in the case a disaster strikes the company. Okay? And then we are going to plan the recovery action, that is the strategy and that's the action. The strategy is we are conceptualizing what we are going to do in the future, and plan recovery action is actually what we will do, you know, what we actually are going to do. Then the second last is plan, validation and train. Once we have all these plannings of what we are going to do, we need to plan our people, the company employees or whoever is in charge. We need to plan and train everybody, you know. We need to plan how to train them, you know. So it's very important that each person in the company knows about how to manage in case of a disaster. Okay? And the last is regular audits and feedbacks, which after the whole thing is created, we can have feedbacks from the employees to improve it and, you know, make it further better. The next process is about how to create a disaster plan document. Basically, it's about a document. The disaster plan document can include the following points. That is, it's not necessary it should stick to it, okay? But it should, like, you know, it's better if it could include all this, or it could include more or less depending on the organization. And it may include, you know, most of the general disaster plan documents, they include these things. First is the introduction or the summary. It just outlines what the document is going to be stating. We have the roles and responsibilities. That is, in this part, the document says or speaks about who are the key personnel in the company, who is responsible for what. For example, this person is responsible as a fire warden. Even in our college, we have this kind of a thing. We have those boards, the notice boards in every class or in the corridors, where the names of the fire wardens and the fire people are mentioned there. And even the names of the first aiders are mentioned in case of a disaster. So it's really good to plan in advance. So that's what the companies are following these days, and it's a real necessity. Incident response. Yeah, the incident response is like we need to know who we need to whom we need to intimate in case of a disaster. Like, you know, who's the first person, who are the main people who we need to inform in case of a disaster. Activation approval is like, this is the stage where the document clearly states that what is the event that is, you know, that will be triggered, you know, that will act as a trigger for the disaster recovery process to begin. You know, before that trigger, the trigger is the one which will actually start the process. And when that happens, the DR process is begun and the document history is created. It should capture and approval notes, everything should be created. version management, all these things, and it should document everything, how the disaster occurred and everything happened, you know, later on. And procedures, the organization policies and procedures should be outlined so that everyone is aware of the policies of the company, okay? And the inventory inspection. Okay, this is also important because the availability of inventory and resources which get activated during the disaster should be checked from time to time. Basically, it's that the plan should be updated, you know. It should not be like you have created a disaster recovery plan and then you're sitting with it for the next 10 years, you haven't even updated it, you know, and the new problems have come up. There's something called cyber crimes, terrorist attacks which are coming in your area, and you're not at all prepared for it. So that's not how it should be. It should be continuously updated and, you know, modified. So to conclude, I will say that it's better to plan rather than to perish. And we see that in many countries, disaster recovery planning is a very important concept, but still there are companies who do not have a disaster recovery plan, and most of them, more than 40% of the companies, those who do not have a disaster recovery plan, they find it really hard. In fact, they have actually shut down after a disaster has occurred, you know. So it's like, it's a total loss for them. The whole business fails just because they haven't planned earlier for what they have to do. Next. These are the references that I've gone through for creating this, and the next is, okay, thank you for listening to me, and for any questions you could please move to the, write your queries on the discussion forum and I'll be answering them. Thank you very much.